Morning, everyone. I first off want to welcome everybody who has registered and attended today's Safety Connection. My name is Melissa Moray. I am a health and safety consultant with Workplace Safety Prevention Services. Currently, my role is a health and safety consultant on the Risk Assessment and Root Cause Analysis project. In my other life with WSPS, I am also a consultant and ergonomist. So I talk to customers and clients about their ergonomic needs, identifying opportunities to enhance and improve their MSD prevention programs, in addition to general health and safety consulting. It is my pleasure today to, first of all, have developed and also delivered the specific content. We are talking about training, but also not just training, but how do we manage and understand some of the hidden causes of musculoskeletal disorders, or MSDs. I realize that the title is focusing on grocery stores, so I will kind of delve into why we focused on the grocery store sector, but certainly this information is applicable to any sector that has any questions or concerns about MSDs in their workplace. And it's really giving some thought and process about what workplaces can start looking at or considering when they're trying to implement any new changes or controls or even manage MSDs in their workforce. As always, I want to remind you all that any AI tools being used to record or transcribe are prohibited. They're not going to be allowed as part of the session. But this session is being recorded, so a recording will be made available on our website once it has been processed and cleaned up. If this is your first time using Microsoft Teams, welcome to this process. One thing that we also focus on as well with our organization is we want to understand who is participating in our safety connections and some of our external engagements. So if you take a look at the chat history, or even look at the link here on this screen, we're trying to understand who is attending these sessions. So we provide this information or collect it on behalf of our main funder, so the Ministry of Labor, Immigration, Training and Skills Development. So if you click on the link on this slide, or again, go to the chat and click on the link, you might have to scroll up at the start of the chat there. We're just collecting basic demographic information. We're not trying to receive any personal information. Again, it's just to understand who is attending these sessions today. If you click on the link and it's asking you for the function number, I believe on page 2, you want to enter 232178. What we do is we aggregate this information and then provide it to the ministry on that behalf. Again, it is optional. We encourage you to do so. It really helps to understand who is attending and where we can perhaps enhance or provide additional information or resources based on the demographics that are attending our sessions today. If you've already filled this in, thank you very much for filling it out. Again, you can fill it out anytime during the session today. You just have to scroll back up to the top of the chat page to see that. So we do recommend, before the session that we were going to review a few housekeeping items. So first off, we recommend that you use computer audio. It is easier to have that information through, or the audio feed, pardon me, through the headset. If you need to use a headset, that's fine. We do recommend that you connect directly to the system. Your microphone is going to remain muted. We may have an opportunity at the end if you folks have any questions that are easier to ask verbally versus the chat. Again, we will provide you with that ability to unmute your microphone, but the microphones will be muted for the whole time. Same thing, your cameras are going to remain off for the duration of the session. If you do ask a question verbally, we will not turn your camera on, so your cameras will be off for this whole session here. So it looks like we have a really intimate group with our session today. So I want to go over a few reaction things. For anybody who's ever developed or delivered any virtual sessions or training or whatever, we know that sometimes it's hard to understand if people are actually getting or engaged with the content. So we do encourage you to use the features in Teams. So there's the reaction button. You should have that available to you. So it can, provide a smile, a thumbs up. See, somebody's already been using the clapping their hands. Again, thumbs up, thumbs down. It kind of tells me that you're still alive and still listening to what we're trying to convey in this session here too. It floats up on the screen and it's not permanent. We will also have a few interactive polls that are going to appear in front of your screen. Again, the poll is really just to gauge some of your knowledge or ask a question pertaining to the content today. Again, you don't have to answer them, but we do encourage it because it helps me drive some of the conversations and understand the layout of who we have in this room today. If the polls don't work for you, you can also use the chat function that shows messages to everyone at every time. The messages themselves are not recorded, so we will see who provides that information. And of course, you may have questions that come up as I'm talking about a particular piece of information. So if you prefer to put the questions in now, I will be monitoring the chat momentarily to kind of see if there's anything there from an engagement perspective. We will have a chance at the end of the session to go over any questions that might have appeared in the chat at the end as well. So depending on your level of security with your organization, you may only be able to use the meeting chat to interact, and that's okay. So we're providing lots of opportunities to engage in that way. In addition to engagement features, let's chat a little bit about the accessibility elements as well. So if you need live captioning, you can click on more in the menu bar. There's an option for language and speech. And then you can turn on live captions. So you have that ability to do so if you do require that from an audio perspective. If you also prefer to view the content in full screen, you do lose the ability to see the chat, but at least the content that you can visualize will be taken over your full screen. Same idea, if you want to enable that, you click on the view from the menu bar, more options, then you'll have an ability to see the full screen. Now, certainly, if you have any technical difficulties or challenges, send a note in the meeting chat. I have an excellent support person behind the scenes who will try to do their best to help you with some of those technical difficulties. But so far, it looks like everything's okay. Again, we have a very intimate group, as I like to call it. And that's okay. That might engage more questions at the end as well. So if this is your first time attending a WSPS Safety Connection, welcome. If this is not your first time, welcome again. The goal of these safety connections is really to put people together and really learn and share some really interesting information about a certain topic within health and safety. So today we are focusing on beyond training, so uncovering some of those hidden causes of musculoskeletal disorders in grocery stores. Like I mentioned before, we will probably be talking about general retail as well. The trigger for this type of request was a specific project that WSPS has been involved in, which I will get into momentarily. But it's a chance to virtually connect with industry peers. Again, the fact that you're registering today tells me that you have at least some curiosity about the topic today. Also allows you a chance to attend from your virtual and personal workspace, and also a chance to receive information and ask those questions that maybe you're not sure of. And we do have an additional support person. I have a secret hidden weapon here with me. If I'm not able to answer that question specifically, we have somebody that can help you as well. Now, that being said, if there are questions at the end that I cannot immediately answer because I might need to do a bit more research, of course, I'm available to answer those questions at the end as well. Or take it offline, and then I will do my best to provide a response to you in that time as well. So we're here today to talk about MSDs, or musculoskeletal disorders. So we're going to take a deeper look at some of the real drivers of musculoskeletal disorders. Again, we are framing it in the sense of the grocery store sector or the grocery retail. But we really want to explore why, prevention is not just about training. In my experience, and some of you perhaps in this room, we understand that MSDs are a significant hazard, a significant source of injury, not only in grocery stores, but I'm going to say probably throughout most industries. It is generally within the top 3 type of injuries that workplaces will encounter. So with this session, we're going to be focusing on providing some practical insights to help you perhaps ask some of those questions, maybe uncover some of those other hidden risks or hidden factors that can contribute to MSDs, other than just looking at our training and are we providing enough training or the right training. So we're also going to focus on some of those hidden causes. So understanding that there are some operational pressures, there's also some cultural issues or questions that can contribute, again, tailored towards the grocery retail environment. So we'll have a chance to ask those questions on how can we look to identify those underlying causes that are, we often forget about, but also talk about some strategies and some resources that can help turn some of this insight into sustainable action. I'm going to reframe that a little bit and say, what is it that you can do within your control? So we understand that in grocery stores, there are some national organizations that are across the country. We also have some regional brands that have some presence maybe in southwestern Ontario, perhaps even up into the Eastern Ontario region. We also have independent grocery stores. So they're standalone, maybe 2 or 3 locations, or even just 1 location as well. So part of this discussion is understanding that the support may be different depending on your location and the type of products that you provide, or even just the work and the operations that you have as well. So this information is going to be geared towards the grocery store sector. Now, again, it can apply to any retail and perhaps even to any other work environment as well. So we're just using the grocery stores as our diving board to get into this really interesting topic. But first things first, I want to focus on a project that we have called a risk assessment and root cause analysis, or health and safety acronym here, RARCA. So this is going to be the first poll question, so I'll give it a few moments to appear on your screen. But I want to know first, and please answer, are you familiar with the risk assessment and root cause analysis project for the grocery store sector? So did you know that this existed before attending this session today? Okay, so we've got 50-50 split. Some were aware, some were not aware. Perfect. So I'm going to get everybody onto the same page here. So with RARCA, or Risk Assessment and Root Cause Analysis, this is a methodology or a process that was initially introduced by our main funder, so the Ministry of Labor, Immigration, Training, or Skills Development. You may know them as the Ministry of Labor. They are currently known as the MLITSD. If you really love acronyms, this is where we're at here. So it's a process where the health and safety associations in the province of Ontario will engage with high-risk sectors to have focused conversations and discussions about the true hazards, the true risks that they are experiencing in their workplace. And it's all driven by the sector. So it's a collaborative approach. So we engage with employers in that high-risk sector. We also engage with the workers in that high-risk sector and the provincial health and safety partners, that being the Health and Safety Association and the Ministry of Labor, Immigration, Training, and Skills Development. So the selection process is a bit more complicated, but in short, grocery stores were identified as a higher risk sector. It is a retail environment. There are factors not only within the workplace, but also externally within the workplace that can increase that risk. For a little bit of context as well, the grocery stores were part of a 3-step approach. We had started this workshop process with the food manufacturing environment. So the producers of the foods that we consume. Then we moved on to the food beverage wholesale distribution. So the folks that were that are housing or warehousing or distributing, kind of gathering all that food product together, the food and beverages, and then distributing it to the retail partners, whether it's convenience stores, grocery stores, any other location. So the grocery stores is that third piece of getting those food products and those beverages in the hands of the end user, aka the customers, you and I, frequenting grocery stores to eat our stuff at the end of the day. So this workshop process starts off with 2 really intensive risk assessment workshops, and a root cause analysis workshop. In the end, we work with those industry partners, so the employers and those workers, to identify the main risks, but also what are some solutions that those employers need help with to manage those high risks. The real goal here is it's informed by the industry. So the employers, the workers have all of the input. We, as the facilitator or health and safety association, are a listener. We are asking for your input to tell us what your issues are. As a group, there's a decision on what those top risks are, and then we proceed with developing solutions and making those available to the grocery store sector and also to the rest of the province as well. So the first step is the risk assessment. So this process started in 2024. We hosted a 1-day risk assessment workshop, or RA. We had a total of 5 employers that represented 9 total folks. So we were able to have 4 workers and 5 employers attend a workshop together. And what we really did is discuss and basically had a brainstorm of what are those high risk hazards? How are your workers being injured or potentially injured in the grocery store sector? We had support from the industry associations, and the Canadian Federation of Independent Grocers was also involved in helping us disseminate this information. So the goal was to identify those top risks. So the workshop participants were basically conducting your risk assessment for all of the hazards that were identified in that workshop based on the likelihood of injury and the consequences. So what are the chances that this hazard does create injury? That's one question we're asked. Second one is, if somebody is injured, what is the most likely kind of injury we will see, from a level of severity from minor all the way up to perhaps a critical injury or significant disability. There were a total of 47 unique hazards that were identified by those workshop participants. So what we did is basically, after the risk assessment, we end up with a top 10 risks for the grocery store sector. And here, oops, nope, not that button. Here is the top 10 risks. So they decided on, based on, and this was all independent voting, so everybody was able to vote anonymously. So the workers and the employers independently assessed these risks. This is the collaboration of the top 10 for everybody that was in that space. WSPS did not have a vote. This is all decided by the participants that were in that space. So musculoskeletal disorders was the #1 risk, followed by slips and trips. We had lacerations from equipment, workplace stress leading to mental harm, workplace harassment, struck by products, falls from ladders, workplace violence, the assault and robbery element on that side, slips or falls from ice buildup in the freezers or refrigerators, and also lacerations from hand tools. We do have the results of these workshops available on our website. The links will be following at the end of the session today. So interesting that MSDs were the top risk identified by those participants, but I think it's good to understand, what we mean by MSDs. So we have a lovely resource. We have a CSA standard Z1004 that has a really great definition of MSDs. Just to be safe, we're not confusing MSDs with chemicals. Musculoskeletal disorders is the acronym that we're using here. So they're injuries or disorders of the musculoskeletal system. So the muscles, the tendons, the nerves, the joints, the blood vessels, the bursas, all those different pieces that help you walk around, do work. If it's an injury that can be caused or perhaps even aggravated by the various hazards or factors in the workplace. So MSDs themselves are what we consider an umbrella term. There's lots of other different definitions. You may have heard of repetitive strain injury, RSI. It could be strains, those sprains, something as specific as carpal tunnel syndrome, tendinitis, so irritation of the tendons. So again, all of those things that are caused or aggravated by certain factors in the workplace. If you've had any basic awareness sessions on MSDs, we should have a better understanding that the three main factors or hazards are force, posture, and repetition. So the force that somebody uses to handle or manipulate product or items, the way that that person is moving in that space to handle or come in contact with their environment, and then how frequently that person is performing those tasks either without rest or the number of times they're doing that particular task over a certain amount of time. So those generally are the main factors that us ergonomists, that WSPS and other ergonomists use to help drive some of those changes or conversations. So the workshop participants then decided on focusing on MSDs when manually handling product as the root cause analysis process here. So it happened to be that they picked the number one risk. So then we move on to a risk assessment workshop. Not risk assessment, pardon me, root cause analysis. I also want to clarify when we talk about manually handling products. So during the workshop, it was decided that they would bundle all of the types of interactions when any grocery store worker is handling those products. So we're talking about in the back room, once that vehicle backs into the loading dock space, how that person is taking the skids or perhaps even manually handling the cases, the boxes, the product, putting it into shelves or storage areas for further storage. The folks who are then taking the stuff from the back room, putting it at the front of house. So again, doing the facing, storing that product on these shelves and the end caps, for the consumers to purchase, all the way down to the cashiers who are then handling those products as they're scanning, maybe perhaps even bagging those products. And then in the end, perhaps even the folks, depending on your size, who are handling the carts, maybe helping to unload the bags into customer vehicles. So we're thinking about the whole spectrum from when the product enters the facility to the time that it ends and leaves the building. So the 2-day workshop was now asking about why. What is contributing to MSDs when manually handling products? So it's a 2-day workshop. The first day is focusing on what that looks like. So how are people contributing to MSDs when manually handling products? We're asking questions about the tools or the machinery that people may be using or not using. We're asking questions about the environment. How does the environment contribute to the space? How does workplace culture play a part in this as well? What are the processes or lack of processes in place that could perhaps lead to somebody developing an MSD? So we're focusing on these different elements as well. And the second piece of that workshop is we look at the main causal factors, so what's been done, and what are some controls or solutions or things that we can ask to help mitigate that risk. The ultimate goal of health and safety is we want to help people go back home at the end of the day in the same condition that they went into work that day, or perhaps even better. But let's focus on same state of mind, same physical state as when they started that workshop that day, day after day after day. So what can we do in a workplace environment to help mitigate that risk, especially when it comes to focusing on MSDs for manually handling products? So in that discussion, the workshop participants came up with the top 10 causal factors. So we're looking at when MSDs are taking place from manually handling product, the workshop folks identified these top 10 factors. So they decided and voted on, again, based on the parameters that we let go. Inadequate training was the top causal factor. Poor workstation design or layout. Poor technique. So technique when we're handling those products. Lack of effective supervision. Lack of evaluation of effectiveness of training. Lack of storage capacity. Fatigue. Lack of or inadequate safe work practices or SWPs. Incorrect use or failure to use the equipment, and inadequate staffing. There were 26 causal factors selected by the workshop participants. So we focus on the top 10 because it's easier to strategize. But this drives an interesting question as well. This is not the first time that we've seen training being identified as the top causal factor for hazards. And that's not unique to MSDs. We have also experienced this input with some of the other sectors that we've engaged with within this RA-RCA process. But let me tell you, no, I'm not going to tell you. You folks are going to tell me. So I have a chat question here. So feel free to use the chat. Why would you believe that training was identified as the top causal factors for MSDs when manually handling product? So free for all, I won't name names. I'm just going to focus on what's in the chat here. Why do you think training was identified as a top causal factor for MSDs? Maybe this is something that you've experienced in your work environment. We've got some chats coming through. Okay. So we have without training, they are not aware of the hazards that they are exposed to. Okay, very good. Poor knowledge transfer in a sector with rapid turnover and serious language barriers. I think somebody has either taken a look at the slides. I know they haven't, but that's great. So we're focusing not only on the individual pieces, but also kind of looking further back as to the why this is happening. So really great input from that individual. Lack of training is usually identified most times in 5Y. Yeah, we're definitely seeing that as well. For sure. So what's great is that you folks are pointing out things like lack of knowledge, maybe lack of knowledge of what? Is it knowledge of the technique, knowledge of how MSDs are occurring, knowledge of lack of knowing the process? Training can include those best practices and postures. Exactly. So this is great. So thank you very much for your inputs here. That's kind of what I was expecting, is it's the, not enough information about the hazard or what to do with it. And I believe it's safe to say that this is common, again, in other hazards and other sectors as well, regardless of the type of injury or incidents that we're trying to prevent. So training seems to be an issue regardless of where it falls into the top 10 here. But it's really interesting, the use of the word training here. And I do have a bit of input here. So again, it's really interesting to try to find the definition of training. So again, I'm reverting back to the CSA standard Z1004. It's workplace ergonomics. It's a management and implementation standard. So again, this is not the law. So in Ontario, we don't have to follow a CSA standard specifically, but it provides a lot of guidance on how we can provide or implement a program to manage MSDs safely. So I'm referring back to the standard because the definition of training here is really interesting and I really enjoy it. So training is known as any structured activity with measurable outcomes. It's provided to either gain, improve, or retain a trainee's specific knowledge, skills, and abilities, or to influence attitude. So the fact that you folks are mentioning poor knowledge transfer or lack of knowledge transfer, that would count as a method of training. And now what's also interesting too is there's a second piece to that definition right in the CSA standard, that things like communication and awareness does not meet the requirements of training itself as defined by the standard, but that can be used as a supplement to a training program. So that's really key here. Another way to think about it as well is we look at the legal obligations of employers in Ontario. So we all have to follow the Occupational Health and Safety Act. So there's a general duty for the employers to provide information, instruction, and supervision to any worker to protect their health or safety. So it doesn't say training in the law, but the information, instruction, and supervision can be interpreted as training. The law does not say anything about awareness. So training and awareness are not in the legal aspect. But the fact that we're talking about training, it's a structured activity. So that tells me it's not just about information transfer. Another way to think about it is it's awareness plus. And this is where, as folks who are involved in health and safety, and more specifically with ergonomics, what we have seen in some sectors or some workplaces is that there's a little bit of confusion between awareness and training. Often we state that we have a training program for a particular hazard, but when we actually look at the content and the way that this information is being provided to those folks, it's more of an awareness piece without any actual training or verification of that piece. So I want to clarify that things like awareness focuses on informing people about a topic or risk, where the training is focusing on those skills to act on that knowledge. Another way to think about it is training is awareness plus do something about it. For example, when we look at awareness, it's to make individuals aware of an issue. We're focusing on theory. It's really about the why. Why do I care about MSDs in the workplace? What do I need to do? We see this topic also with other hazards. So for example, if you folks have a lockout tagout program, or you know folks who do, awareness means when I see a lock on a piece of equipment, I know that it's locked out and I'm not supposed to touch it. Why? Because it will hurt me very, very badly. So awareness is basic information. The training are those skills and the competencies to actually do something about it. It's the how. So things like if you provide training on lifting techniques, is it applicable to your work environment? Are you teaching the right way to handle heavy or awkward objects versus just telling them on a screen, here's how to do it? So the training is the how. So those practical skills that the person then has to consider when they're performing those tasks, or recognize that this is what I'm supposed to do if I have to interact with that. Another way to think about it, again, using the lockout tagout example, folks who perform lockout tagout are actually applying those locks on those devices. They get that practical training of how to do it. What are those situations when they would apply the lock? Versus awareness is everybody needs to know, if you see a lock, don't touch it unless you're authorized. So we kind of use a similar principle with ergonomics, or with trying to prevent those MSDs in those spaces there too. So another quick poll question for you, as it's going to pop up on the screen. So what are sort of training do you provide for preventing MSDs? So you can select more than one option. So I want to see, what are those things that you're providing? Are you providing a pamphlet or written instructions for preventing MSDs for certain tasks? Are you providing some information through an online learning module? Do you have conversations in a team huddle at the beginning of the shift? Do you perform any practical or hands-on element? Or do you perform other? So let's see what we've got here. Okay, so looks like we've got everybody's doing a bit of everything. I love it. So what that tells me is that there is a balance. So thinking back to that definition of training, there's like the communication piece, there's awareness, and then there's the how to actually do it. Love it. One person said other. Again, I might circle back to that at the end to kind of find out what is the other thing that you're performing. So we'll kind of leave it at that. But you know, if we ask and look at the question, do MSDs actually, does training actually prevent MSDs? In short, it does not. We have to think about what training is. Training is talking about a particular topic or hazard based on the scenario, and knowledge transfer and things that the person should be doing to mitigate that risk. But we also have to remember that those factors are still always going to be present. The training does not remove those exposures. It does not have any impact on the force, the posture, or the repetition that that person has to encounter when handling product manually. So training is a form of a control but it does not prevent MSDs itself. Another way to look at it is we think about the investigations. So if you've been involved in conducting investigations with your workers, for particular incidents or hazards, the first piece is, well, the worker wasn't trained properly, but the design of the task itself hasn't been impacted. So we may provide additional training on that individual or a group of folks, but the source of harm or the hazard itself has not been adjusted or factored into. And I'm also not saying that training itself is bad. It is a weak control if it is the only way that we are handling or managing those hazards. So if we're using training alone or awareness alone, it's not enough to prevent MSDs. But training is excellent. So what can training do in this spectrum? So of course, it can increase the awareness of those factors for MSDs. So it provides that information transfer, that knowledge of what are those things I need to look out for. It can also help workers be aware of what their body is doing and recognize some of those early symptoms that they may experience as they develop or potentially develop an MSD. Some of that training may also include, what do we have from our policies and procedures? Are we reporting concerns? Are we reporting incidents? Are we having that open dialogue between the worker and their direct supervisor or the store manager before those injuries can perhaps become a bit more severe? But we're also looking at the tools and the equipment. So again, are we training individuals on how to use those devices correctly? So again, not just awareness, but are we showing them what to do, how to use a cart, how to load it properly? Can you show me that you've done it or understand the way that we are training you on this particular method? But it can also help to reinforce some of those safe practices, some of those procedures that we already have in place. So training is part of that regular reminder of what we're doing here. But training is one thing. We can have a really amazing program for training for MSDs. But I just have a simple chat question for you this time, so feel free to use the chat. How do you evaluate the effectiveness of that training? So it's kind of an interesting concept, is how do you know that your training is effective? Or how do you evaluate how that training is enacting change, positive or negative? How do you know that that training is doing its intent? So I'll leave a few moments as we get some responses in the chat. And it's interesting as we get answers in the chat, because training effectiveness or lack of effective training evaluation was also one of those top factors identified by the workshop participants. So it's interesting that there was the training element, and then a bit further down, there was a lack of training effectiveness evaluation. Okay, so monitoring, supervision. Okay, great, thank you. Observations, culture shifts and attitude towards safety. I like that somebody did put in, are we actually reducing injuries or the severity of those injuries? Exactly. So it is a reactive type of process, but yes, have our numbers been impacted? What's reported, what's injured, what's going on here? Observation, quizzes, assessing incidents related to MSDs, confirmation when observing colleagues' work. Okay, love it. So you are doing some of those checks to make sure that is what we're providing to you as a worker sticking. Another way to think about that. But we also have to think about the training itself. Are we giving the right information to begin with? Are we targeting those real risks, not just general advice? My colleague who is in this space with me, we do sometimes encounter this in some environments where if we ask, what is the general training you receive about how to do safe lifting? I often get the response, well, I got to lift with my knees. All the lifting happens with my knees. As an ergonomist or specialist in that field, we know that the lifting itself, the action of lifting, cannot physically occur with the knees. So again, we won't talk about that much. Again, this is not turning into a training session about that. Again, no spoilers here. But the lifting itself cannot physically happen with the knees. The knees don't have enough strength for that piece. There's other body parts that do that lifting for us. And perhaps you already know what that body part is. So we won't get into that right now. But it's targeting that real risks. So it's understanding the jobs or the tasks that we are performing, and do we have the right information for that thing? Another thing I've observed is some workplaces have an awareness piece to their grocery staff about office ergonomics, but they're not performing any tasks that require them to be in front of a computer. So again, is that information really effective to manage that person's risks if we're not even giving them the right information to begin with? Again, food for thought. Food for thought, grocery store, yes, that is absolutely intentional on my part. So if we can apply that content immediately to the relevant tasks that we're performing, then obviously the training is more effective. We're also explaining on the how, like what am I supposed to do in situation X, Y, Z? Not just why am I going to potentially have an injury or what am I supposed to do? It's what, how, what is the method? Why is this task risky? How am I exposed to this MSD risk, and why those controls matter? Training, especially when it comes to the body interactions, we all come in different shapes and different sizes, different physical abilities. So the fact that we can provide or attempt to provide more hands-on or practical experience really helps to build that muscle environment to say, hey, I know when I'm lifting this particular box, my muscles are straining in this particular way. So let's make sure that I'm doing it in a way that protects me and my individual needs. Because again, general advice may not apply to all tasks or even to all individuals. And when you include things like demonstrations, it helps to provide that feedback, that coaching. So I'm very, very thankful that the folks that you are using the chat have mentioned that there's those observations. And again, that coaching, is that coaching appropriate? So is the right information being provided to those folks who are not meeting the established standard that we expect when persons are having to handle particular products? I also encourage the reinforcement over time. So training and awareness is an ongoing feature. If you just provide training one time, it rarely encourages or changes behavior. We have that experience with certain sectors. Another way to think about it as well is, I'm going to use a really offbeat example here, is you're getting your license to drive a vehicle in Ontario. You may have taken training before, maybe driver's education. Maybe that helps you. And again, think about how often we then have to continue driver training. There's none of that requirement there. Right? So sometimes the skills that we develop over time, we presume that those just become part of our way of driving. They may not necessarily be reflective of the environments and the scenarios that we're dealing with here. So same idea of reinforcement over time. And we're not just looking at, did the person attend the training as a tick box exercise saying, yep, they did the awareness, so they're trained. Again, it's taken that responsibility of making sure that we're monitoring those workplace practices and reduction in that exposure. And if we focus on, where training falls in the hierarchy of controls for managing hazards effectively, training kind of falls in between this awareness and administrative piece. So it's part of that spectrum, but it's not the be-all end-all. So like I mentioned before, it's more effective if we can try to eliminate or make changes to the work environment, in addition to things like awareness and training and PPE, if that is something that is helpful there too. So in MSD prevention, and also just any hazards that we're trying to manage as well, a combination of those controls may be required to reduce the risks to that acceptable level. And again, it's whatever is within control of our workspace there. So the fact that inadequate training and training effectiveness was brought up in 2 separate occasions during the workshop is really, really interesting. But again, this topic is not just about training, but let's talk about some of those other factors. So we've talked about training. I'm going to cross it out here. Lack of evaluation of effectiveness of training. But there's some other factors that were brought up directly within the workshop that I want to speak to about. So I want to focus on workplace layout for a few moments. I do recognize, again, depending on the physical space or the square footage of a grocery store, you may have a large back room. You may have a small back room where it's maybe a bit more condensed, right? And if we think about the general flow of the product through to the customer's ends, of course, we have the loading space in the back room where things are coming off of the truck. They're manually being handled and placed onto shelves. Depending on the size of the store, there may be some mechanical equipment being used to remove skids or pallets of product to be put onto storage racks. That may not be possible in all situations. So the storage spaces in the back room can be very, very cramped. So lots of little spaces. They may not be also designed for, I'm going to call it human interaction. So those spaces, the heights of those shelves, you know, how frequently we are accessing certain items can also play a part. And we also have to recognize the hidden element in that room is the cyclical nature of grocery stores. You know, when is that product being unloaded? Is it happening at night or during the day when we're really, really busy? There's also increased volume during seasonal promotions, during certain holidays. So we have some of those factors where there may be more product in a back room than we can normally handle because we can't put it out in the front. So that can play a role potentially in developing MSDs. We've also got the service counters. So for spaces that have a deli counter where you have the refrigerated glass, your meat and seafood areas, your bakeries, if you have a in-house bakery space. So those counters themselves are quite high, but that's often where we are handing the product to the customer who has ordered a cake or is asking for some sliced cheese or meat. So those counters are a little bit higher than those spaces too. But then also to the flip side are those counters themselves, so the work tables. Depending on the work and the physical effort for some of those tasks, some of those heights might be a little bit higher for some individuals. And then of course we have the product shelves. So what the customer is seeing at the front. So in any retail environment, I'm going to say probably specifically in grocery stores, there is a way that those products have to be faced. So again, the direction, the labeling has to be visible in front of the customer's eyes. We also know that there are, you know, promotions, maybe certain brands of product have to be at eye level versus, you know, below eye level or above high level as well. So those are factors depending on the volume and how we are handling those things that can have an impact on that. And the reason we know this is during the workshop is when we ask the questions like how is layout taking place, we know that there are some things that are not able to be controlled directly by that space. You're being directed by a corporate element. If you have a corporate office that is directing the layouts, if that is the level of control. We also have those seasonal promotions where, for example, product X is going to be front and center because it's the busy time of year where we know that this product is being sold. So that might be heavier than product Y, which is maybe less expensive, but again, they're not the current promotion that week. Your end caps, same thing, the displays that you're setting up in those particular areas as well. So the layout of that front end can also be an issue too. And let's not forget, I think a bigger situation too is the cashiers, right? The folks who are now handling almost every single product in a scan format. So again, they're looking at the product, they're trying to identify where the barcode is, they're lifting it, probably scanning it through, and then positioning it to one side or the other, right? So there's one hand, both hands, the right hand or the left hand going to provide it to the bagging area. There's also a standard height, so between 36 and 42 inches, 91 to 107 centimeters. So we look at that space, and I do recognize, and I've seen this in a lot of spaces, is depending on the weight of the product that is being scanned, the cashier or the customer service representative will ask the customer to say, leave it in the cart, I will reach around and scan it that way, rather than lifting it. So I do appreciate for sure that there are some ways that we can minimize some of that extra handling in some of those specific areas as well. So your cases of water, large bags of dog food, paper towels, again, they're light, but it's a very, very large item. So maybe it's easier to just scan it from the cart versus, lifting it and handling it that way. And that's the challenge with the cashier space is there are many different products being handled, different volumes. There's also the underlying pressure of having to scan it quickly enough so that the customer experience is valid because there's perhaps a lineup of other folks. But there's also the reaching implications too. So again, bringing up that posture element, how far are we reaching to grab that item if I don't have a conveyor to bring those items in front of me to minimize my reaching here. So we have some guidelines, again, where possible, to try to minimize some of those reaches too. And when we think about stocking, you may have learned this perhaps in your awareness sessions, or perhaps even as part of your training, is we want to consider what is the ideal handling if I do have to handle something that is a little bit heavier than what I would like. Again, people come in different shapes and sizes. So we have smaller individuals, taller individuals, so their comfort zone range will be different. And that's something that we cannot control or change. So the general guideline that we have is for handling that is frequent, should try to be between the shoulder height and the waist height. Anything above and below that, you're getting into some more awkward postures. And, depending on the weight of the object as well, you have that additional force being applied to those joints in addition to the extended posture, let alone how frequently they have to handle those particular objects. So again, it's recognizing that there are some spaces or things that we cannot control or change. So that may also change the way that we train folks or the way that we acknowledge certain elements. So again, what I've got here on this next slide is things to consider if you do have the ability to make some changes to the storage areas as well. I do want to be clear that we have shelving versus racking. So shelving is what you might see in the front of the store. You may also have that in the back space. So we also want to look at the depth. How deep do we have to go? Or another way to look at it is that horizontal reach. We suggest that those shelves should not be deeper than 45 to 60 centimeters or 18 to 24 inches. Again, I've done a bit of work in grocery stores. I am also a frequent visitor of grocery stores. So I know that the front shelves in some locations are going to be deeper than that. Why are we asking for smaller shelves depth-wise? It just means that we're going to reduce that extra reach, that shoulder rotation, that shoulder extension. Can we have those high turnover items within that power zone or the comfort zone? Again, the mid-thigh to shoulder height. Again, it's also good for the customer. Now I also realize that, eye level is kind of where we tend to focus our retail brain, or that is how those front of house shelves are set up. So eye level versus shoulder to mid-thigh level, there's a little bit of a discontinuity there. So again, it's where do we find that balance and how do we supplement that with awareness and training in addition to other factors as well. So things like keeping the aisles clear. I don't necessarily mean the front of the store, because generally there is a lot of effort to keep the front of the store as clean and efficient as possible because you have the customers in that space. I really want to focus on the back space because that sometimes can get forgotten, but we also have to remember there are workers performing tasks in the back room as well. So making sure that those aisles are clear. Again, housekeeping, managing slips and trips, congestion where possible, understanding where we have some of those limitations. But even things like minimizing the unnecessary movements where we can. So think about how often a box of crackers is being handled before it gets to the customer's hands. It might be twice, it might be 4 times. It's one box of crackers, but you add that up over time, in addition to everything else that they have to handle. Where are some of those ways we can minimize the restacking, the breaking down of skids, if that's things, even relocating the inventory? We know that there's some limitations to this as well. The large footprint stores that have more space versus the smaller stores, perhaps in more urban environments, or even just a small space, right? Just limited footprint in the front, so then you have even less in the back space. Those are those things that we know that can contribute or exacerbate some of those symptoms too. We also have ladders and step stools. So individuals that require that boost, so to speak. Again, thinking about, do we have the right equipment here? And I'm just going to, I can't put a link in the chat because I forgot to put that there. But you know what? I just realized we have that in the resources later on. So that's on me. Apologize. Are we selecting the right tool for the tasks? Ladders and step stools, they have different uses. Back room versus front room. We know that ladders can be very unstable. How do we maintain balance? We generally need to have 2 feet on the rung. Is it properly positioned when that person does have to use the step stool? Are you facing the ladder and the area that you're trying to access? Or is the ladder kind of placed perpendicular to the space and then you're kind of twisting your body? Thank you, Sarah, for that checklist. I knew she'd help me out here. So positioning that ladder there. Are you twisting your upper body? So the twisting, again, that's an awkward posture here. Climbing up and down. Can you maintain the 3 points of contact? Are people even inspecting or checking the ladders or the step stools to make sure that they are in good condition, right? Do you have damaged rungs? Are there loose screws? Again, do the folks who use those ladders and step stools, first of all, know that they should be checking them? Do they know what to check for? How to use that equipment properly? Outside of MSD prevention, I would say that ladder and step stool training often is just awareness. It's like, here you go. Here's how to use a ladder on a virtual platform. Let's use a new learning system to show you what to do with a ladder, and then here you go. Versus that training is, show me how you would use a ladder. And that gets into this, are we training folks on how to use ladders and step stools? There's also the element too of, do we assume that folks know how to use a ladder or step stool? I'll frame it another way. Do we assume people know how to use personal protective equipment unless they've been shown or trained on how to use it properly? Again, what is within your control? Making sure that people are understanding and know about the different hazards. So kind of tying into this hidden element here too, what we've been focusing on a lot is the physical pieces, stuff that we know we can see, we can observe, we can touch. We know that physical factors are only part of that story. So things like the force, so the weight of the objects, we generally know what that information is. The way that that person is interacting with that space, the repetition, those are processes that we have visible control over to some extent. Work layouts, the use of ladders, of course, there's other things as well. I haven't even touched on safe work practices. Again, that is a way of informing folks. So in a sense, safe work practices are a form of awareness, which is part of an overall training program. So these are things that are a bit more tangible. But what's interesting for us and some of the intel that we received during that workshop with the industry participants is focusing on the non-physical factors, the stuff that is discussed but not necessarily addressed or understood. So we're going to talk a little bit about those psychosocial factors that may shape MSD risk in the grocery stores. So this is perhaps part of a different element as well, but I want to focus on psychosocial factors. So I'm hoping that you have heard of this before. But psychosocial factors are something that is, again, the workplace culture, societal, and also the psychological factors that can have a way of determining the way that a person interprets their space. So how a worker responds to the work and their work environment. Again, these are generally things that you cannot feel or touch. It's everything surrounding that work environment. Another way to think about it is, how are people perceiving factors that can affect their work? So these factors can have an influence on how that person behaves. So things like workload management. So do workers understand their general responsibilities? Are they able to have conversations with their supervisor if things are not ideal? Again, outside of MSDs, but just in general. Things like leadership and expectations. Do leaders and supervisors understand their responsibilities? Is that communicated to them effectively? But is that also communicated effectively to the workers? So there are factors that can have an influence, and there's some level of responsibility within employers that can have an impact on health and safety. So I'm actually going to move on to this slide here, just for the sake of time, because I want to focus a little bit on some of those factors that were discussed in this RARCA workshop. And what's interesting is, in some of the factors, we do talk about workplace culture. So these elements here were identified as a factor within that space. It didn't end up in the top 10 factors for MSDs when manually handling product, but it was an underlying or hidden element when we were discussing each of those different factors too. I have an asterisk there because we know that not every store will have this, but this is what was discussed within that workshop space. This can also be applicable to most work environments. I would also safely say that this is perhaps a set of factors that are common in general retail. So we perhaps have high job demands. Stores are busier during peak periods. You have the holidays, the weekends. We had a long weekend last week with, some celebration happening. So again, those outputs, do we have enough space? There's perhaps a pressure to maintain speed at the checkout, or even restocking the shelves, especially when a product is really, really popular, or we just don't have enough items. We have multitasking taking place. So we have high job demands, perhaps a combination of low job control. So there's maybe not an ability to make those changes or adjust the work pace to take those breaks. Again, some of those are perceived to be factors. There's perhaps lack of autonomy. So again, that is just the nature of the work that we are asking those folks to do. And again, I want to clarify, this is not bad. It's acknowledging that some of these factors can have a role to play in how injuries can take place. Perhaps there's poor social support, and we're talking within the store itself. So less supervision from the supervisors, less assistance. Again, especially during those busier periods, maybe there's lack of team coordination or collaboration. I don't have everybody available to help me unload this skid of products. I'm just going to do it myself because I know that, the customers are waiting for the 30-pound turkeys because it's the high season for turkeys, right? Job insecurity. Again, there's perhaps a fear that if I don't perform my tasks effectively, my job is at stake here. Another way to think about it is, if you put yourselves in the mind of a young worker, where was your first job? Where did you first start entering the workforce? Chances are it was perhaps in a retail setting, right? So there's perhaps even more pressure from young workers or new workers to perform like they're supposed to. Lack of training, lack of effective communication with their workers. Shift work and scheduling. We know that there's outside factors that perhaps can play a role in a worker's availability or perhaps lack thereof. But it's acknowledging that the work hours might be different. How many hours I'm working per week, in addition to all these other pressures that I have, those additional responsibilities, they can play a role. Something that was very strongly discussed during the workshop that kept coming up over and over and over again was the factor of the customer. So again, in general retail, we have those interactions. Perhaps dealing with a challenging customer, can increase that emotional stress. That can induce some of those tensions, especially in the neck and the shoulders. So all of these things, again, the way that that worker perceives those elements without the reassurance or knowledge that what can I do within my control to manage that, can have an impact in how MSDs are there. So again, really, what is that connection between these factors that are not physical, not tangible, so to speak, but how does that play a role in how MSDs can manifest? So it's really thinking about how the body reacts to stressors, right? So there's a physiological response. So if that person is under a lot of pressure to lift a lot of things right away, again, stress activates that nervous system, right? So it can cause the muscles to tense up, especially in the neck and the shoulders. And those are the body parts that we are using to handle manually products. So you're always in that sort of fight or flight mode. So remaining tense for those long periods. That can also reduce the blood flow, because if your muscles are continuously strained or being activated, that can decrease the circulation to those muscles and tendons, the ones that actually need the blood flow in order to perform those tasks, right? It can limit that oxygen. So it can also, in the flip side, slow down some of those potential recoveries or even increase the sense of fatigue. Then we have the inflammatory response, right? So stress can elevate the cortisol. There's other stress hormones that are involved in this whole process. So that can perhaps contribute to inflammation and also just reduce the ability for that muscle to work properly or effectively based on those conditions. So there's the physiological side of things. Again, there's also the behavioral, right? And again, outside of any other stressors, when we're under that way, we know we have to get certain things out really, really quickly. I'm not going to always perform based on my training or my awareness. So I might lean more forward to try to get things through the scanner faster. The workers may rush tasks and adopt more awkward postures than ideal, or perhaps even skip proper lifting techniques just to help the customer. There may be pressure, self-imposed pressure to reduce the number of breaks or just not take any breaks at all. So leading to those less micro breaks, again, increasing that repetitive motion. But I also think too, there's a sense of maybe not necessarily negligence, but also perhaps ignorance of those symptoms and early signs that something isn't quite right. Maybe it's also trying to justify that, well, I'm just getting older, so I'm naturally going to have some of those aches and pains that are generally attributed to age. Perhaps it is a factor, but the way that that work is being performed, in addition to some of those other factors, maybe can play a role or perhaps lead to more chronic scenarios as well. Let alone the cognitive piece, right? There's distraction, additional fatigue, too many things coming on at once can lead to the likelihood of increased errors and unsafe movements. And then just decision-making under pressure. They might prioritize speed over proper technique just to make sure they can get that product out. So again, this is really thinking about that awareness piece, but this is what that worker is going through. And each worker generally perceives pressures differently. Just like they come in different sizes, different physical abilities, there are different things that can interpret those feelings as, well, I need to work faster, or I'm not going to work as fast because I know if I work too fast, I'm going to hurt myself. Again, is that from experience? Is that from other factors or other elements within that space? Again, that is very, very dependent. But I also want to clarify too that just because there are some psychosocial factors that can have a role to play, it doesn't mean that an MSD is imminent. It's also combined with those physical risk factors. So just the fact that we have high workload, perhaps low job control, does not mean that an MSD is going to happen. You still need to have those physical factors, the force, the posture, the repetition. So we think about psychosocial stress as a risk multiplier. So in a sense, it's a cause, but it's also a thing that can also maybe step up the risk to something that is maybe not acceptable. Cashier under time pressure might twist more awkwardly just to grab items more quickly. Something like a clerk stocking the shelves, maybe worried about meeting the quotas and may lift those loads without assistance. So again, it's a factor, or sorry, it's a risk multiplier. Doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have those things too. So again, what can we do to manage that different element too? Do you have an incident reporting and investigation process? We recognize that investigation of incidents and reporting of incidents is a reactive process, but do you have a process? Is it documented? Do people know what questions to ask to find out what's happening? How far does your process go in terms of understanding the causes? Are you just asking what happened and then the solution is provide more training? Or do you have a chance to ask sort of like deeper questions other than just the gut reaction? Do you acknowledge or consider some of those non-physical factors? So are there elements within the psychosocial pieces that are at least being acknowledged or documented somewhere on that form? But we also have to understand, what is the end goal of incident investigations? The goal is to understand what happened and implement controls or provide ways to prevent this from happening again. So we're trying to remove the blame or the fault to default to the worker, but also acknowledging that there's maybe other things that could play a role here. Now, what are those other things? Again, if you've taken, I'm going to call it basic health and safety awareness training. Again, the irony of that word there is very clear. We know that there's mandatory health and safety awareness from the ministry that we have to perform. They call it training, but it's an awareness piece. So if you've taken awareness training before, or if you've taken any incident investigation training or certification training in Ontario, there are factors that can contribute to hazards. We can also extrapolate that from the injury perspective. We can also extrapolate that specifically with MSDs. So rather than just going to the person interaction, which is what are people doing or not doing, let's look at equipment. Did the equipment play a role? So was the equipment not available? Was it adequate? Was it not maintained? Or it was maintained, so the equipment did not play a role in those factors too. There's the material piece. So if you're handling, it's really more for those raw products. So those boxes, the weights, do we know how heavy it was? Maybe it wasn't properly labeled. Was it defective? Again, that work environment piece, the workplace layout, the housekeeping, noise, vibration, temperature, radiation, maybe that does have an impact on those things. Lighting can have a role too. Process, is the task repetitive? Were there enough breaks? Was that person working alone? What's interesting too here is when we look at those factors, one thing that's not here is culture or those non-physical factors. We do focus on that. We do have an element of the culture piece in this RARCA project. So what's really great is we do have some of this intel. And how we got to that is we used a process called 5 Whys. And I believe somebody in the chat did mention the 5 Why element too. So I'm glad that you're using this. So it really helps to ask the questions. It's kind of like asking a 3-year-old or answering a 3-year-old's question about why is the sky blue? You provide an answer and they say why. And then you're stuck, and then you have to go on Google to find out why is the sky blue. That might not be enough to answer that child's curiosity. So we kind of use a similar approach. Obviously, the persons we're dealing with are of age, but it's a process to deal with the root causes. So we're not just trying to put a Band-Aid on a solution. We're trying to understand those other factors, whether it was the system, whether it was lack of process, not enough training. You're trying to get away from just saying there's not enough training or the worker made an error, because there's a reason why that person made those decisions to end up with that incident or that hazard or injury taking place. You don't have to ask the question 5 times. You might get the right answer at 3. You might need 7 levels of asking those questions. What's great is it can be used from a preventative standpoint, but also not reactive. And it allows questions to be asked a certain way. Like, we have an incident where the worker injured their shoulder. Okay. Well, why did they injure their shoulder? Very simply, they were lifting heavy boxes repeatedly. Okay, but why? Well, those boxes were being manually transferred from the pallets to the shelves. So again, I'm kind of jumping ahead here, but we maybe end up with, well, we know that the storage layout itself was designed, but there was no ergonomic input, has not been also reassessed. Now, I do agree that the way we ask those why questions can also differ. We may end up with a completely different route. But ultimately, we generally end up with like it's a process issue. Maybe there's a design consideration or something else that's happening. We also have to acknowledge that there is some element where the worker made decisions, but maybe the training itself wasn't effective, or training was fine, training worked because it is meeting those needs, but there's something else physically in that space that still is going to lead to some of those incidents or injuries occurring. So what can we do? So again, what are some of those insights? And I want to be clear, given who we have in the room today, that you may not have a lot of direct control because you are being managed by a corporation, and corporations have certain standards. But first things first, focus on what you can do within your space. So first off, do you understand the tasks and assess them for risks? Not just MSDs, but also others as well. But we're going to go with the MSD lens for a few moments. So perhaps there are corporate policies or steps that have to be followed because we have a brand that we have to follow. There are certain standards that way. So understanding that relationship between what the store says, the corporate level, and what you can manage yourself as a GM, as a store manager, as a supervisor, even perhaps as a worker too. Because some corporate policies where you have to use a certain type of heat-resistant glove when you're removing products from an oven. That's maybe a corporate standard, but maybe not applicable for your space because you have a lot of individuals that have smaller hands, and those gloves are maybe a bit too big. So is there flexibility in purchasing other things that will help my workers, again, with their particular needs? So understanding what are those limitations where you have some flexibility. Check your training for MSDs. Well, actually, even before that is, do you have a prevention program for MSDs? How often are you training? What are you training those folks on? Is it applicable to your reality? In other words, are you providing training that is relevant to those tasks after they've been assessed for MSD risks? What is the technique that is being done? Again, from that training perspective, what are we training them on? How do we verify or evaluate that that training is actually effective? And then into the reactive side, do we have an investigation program? Has reporting? Do people know what to report? Again, that's a very simple question, but sometimes cannot be answered so simply. But also within those hazard reporting and incident investigations too, is do we at least acknowledge that there are some factors that are not physical that may have played a role in that injury? Again, that psychosocial element too. Thinking about the tools and the equipment that the folks have to use. We know we cannot change the number of SKUs that we have. We cannot change or have an impact on the weight of those objects. We may not even have any control on how they're to be staged at the front of the store. But things like carts or dollies, are we inspecting those wheels? Do people know what to look for? Do people know what ladders and step stools to use? Are they made aware or are they trained? Again, awareness versus training, two very, very different things. Depending on the size of your individual location, you may have a JHSC that can help bring out those questions, bring up some ideas, have those conversations with workers who maybe don't know that they can go to the JHSC or they don't know they can go to their managers. But it's also allowing for those open communications, between the store level and the workers. I did notice that most of you mentioned that you have a team huddle. Is that store-wide or is that by department? Again, allowing that open communication. And again, I'm not just focusing on MSDs here. I'm going to say for anything. How do we acknowledge those different elements too? Don't forget, we are also here to help. We are a health and safety association. We have lots of resources. We have lots of training. One of the sectors that we focus on strongly is the service sector, the retail side. We also have all of this knowledge and intel from the grocery store folks, and we are actively working towards developing some solutions. Again, not just driven by the inputs, but also input from those folks to help us develop those solutions too. Of course, we have basic health and safety training. We provide JHSC certification as well, but we are part of the health and safety system in the province. So let us help you, work with you. So a few resources that we have. Again, don't worry about clicking on the links here. Our Safety Connections team is going to be sending you a follow-up email in the next 24 hours with some of these links here, but know that we have a lot of expertise. We have ergonomists across the whole province to help you. Actually, there's two of us in this space here right now, but we have resources to help you, again, within some of those physical elements as well. Another resource that I'm going to plug right now is the Center for Research and Expertise in Musculoskeletal Disorders, or CREA-MSD. You may have heard of them before, but they have a really great resource about the connection between psychosocial factors, MSDs, and mental health. So again, this is a really great collaboration of understanding the non-physical factors and how that can intermingle with the physical elements of MSDs in the workplace. So really recommend you check that out. If you have the time, that link is going to be in the resources that we send up shortly. But I want to tie up two loose ends here before we pause for questions. What really drove this safety connection today is the work that we are doing with the RARCA project specifically for grocery stores. So you can click on this green button here. It is a link to our external website for the grocery store RARCA project. You have the results of the risk assessment and root cause analysis workshops. I think the key pieces, though, are the toolkits. So we have toolkit for the top 10 risks that were identified in the risk assessment workshop, but then also a solutions toolkit of what is currently available in the health and safety system for handling MSDs when manually handling product. I can see that most of you actually are from the grocery store sector industry today, so we probably will be reaching out to you because we have more work coming. We are developing those solutions as we speak, and we are working to build a well-rounded needs assessment to actually go into the grocery stores and help them identify some of those needs that they may require for MSDs and other hazards, but also connect them with those resources and consulting that can help mitigate those risks either at the store level or perhaps even at a regional or corporate level, depending on the structure of that facility too. We also do have work ongoing in different phases. So grocery stores are not the only sector we have focused on with this RARCA project. The yellow link here is a landing page to the sectors that we are currently engaged with. We've got food manufacturing, food beverage wholesale distribution, automotive manufacturing, of course, grocery stores, and we have just finished our first initial work with the vehicle service and repair sector. There's more to come on that piece. We are still working with other sectors too. So take a look at our information, reach out if you have any questions. Now, one more thing before I bring on my special superpower friend here, colleague. We are part of this health and safety system, and we do offer some solutions and services for free. Again, workplaces that pay into WSIB premiums, you're a member of WSPS. So we can help you with some health and safety assessments, help some workplaces identify some of those elements too. If you happen to have received an order from the ministry inspector, you are eligible to receive some consulting from us to help close those gaps from whatever that ministry inspector provided to you. So we can help you get back to compliance. Again, it is part of our mandate to help every worker be healthy and safe every day within the manufacturing, service, and agricultural sector. So this is really where we are a really great team. Now, speaking of team, I'm going to invite my colleague, Sarah, to do a very brief intro about one of those solutions that we have readily available just for the retail sector. Go ahead, Sarah.
Awesome. Thank you, Mel. So zooming out a little bit from the grocery store in particular, just want to make sure that you folks also are aware of the ministry campaign for retail that is underway this year. Actually close to wrapping up, but continuing on as well in the new year of April 1 onwards. So for anyone that is in the retail sector, and of course, grocery stores, we know are a huge component of that, we are offering free walkthroughs, and it speaks to a lot of the stuff that Melissa covered today. So looking at the flow of goods through the store, looking at ladder safety, looking at things like pedestrian safety, even if it's like customer carryout, for example, or the pickup that I am constantly using for my groceries. So all of those factors are things that we would look at within that 1 to hour and a half long walkthrough. Once the consultant is done at your workplace, you'll get a really great high-level checklist filled out that just gives you some quick action items, recommendations, and just resources to draw your attention to. There is a register here link that you are more than welcome to click on. You can, of course, reach out to Melissa or myself, and we can help you out with that, or our wonderful customer care team. But yeah, do know that that's free, and it's really just here to assist you folks with that in support of the ministry campaign. I'll put a cool little link as well, which I think we'll have as well, Mel, for the summary resources. But just if you're curious, if this is the first time that you've heard of the campaign, there's some good content within that link. So I'll just pop that in the chat here. But yeah, any questions, certainly let us know. We're here to help you on that one for sure.
And this is excellent sort of segue into, we are your partners in health and safety. And again, Sarah is an excellent partner out in the East region too. So whether it's myself or Sarah or any other consultant at WSPS, again, we are here to help you. I do realize that we're actually close to the end of time here. So I'm going to take a quick pause. And Sarah did just post in the link about what retailers should know about MSDs and the ministry campaigns. Love it. So I'm gonna stop here. I'm just gonna ask if there are any questions about our topic today or any other things you have that is kind of burning in your brain for the next few minutes. So just checking to see if there are any questions. Again, put them in the chat, or if you want to raise your hand and say, I want to speak, let us know and we can unmute your microphone if needed. You're very welcome. So again, if there are no more questions, again, you will be getting an email from us again within the next 24 hours with those links. If you were not quick enough to click on those, that's perfectly okay. That's why we provide the summary email. Again, if you have any questions or things that kind of come up at you as you are proceeding with your daily jobs or tasks, again, feel free to reach out to us. We are definitely here to help connect you with the resources and make sure that yourselves as workers, whether you're a manager, supervisor, or a worker, are going home safe at the end of the day, right? So on that note, I'm going to thank you everybody for attending today's Safety Connection. You'll receive the follow-up email shortly. And if you want to get in touch with a WSPS consultant, there are many ways to connect with us. So have a safe and pleasant afternoon and have a great rest of your day. Be safe. Thank you.